All right, can you guys hear me? Sorry about the delay. How's everybody out there doing on this Friday night? Am I coming through loud and clear? Oh, Nico, you want to be creeped out? This is a good one if you want to get creeped out. I think this is a good one. So, let's see who's with me so far. Okay. Killer Cutie over on Twitch. Kevin Smythe over on Twitch. Snake Kruger. I love that name. Snake Kruger. Jugga Doge. Big Crack Rock. Sam XWI. Also, thank you for following, Sam. I appreciate that. Hope you guys are all doing well over on Twitch. Let's see who's with me. Over on YouTube. David Vines, Captain Halloween, Faces of Horror, what's up? Stephen LaPierre, Nico, Jess Graham, DJ Donnelly, my buddy Gibbs, Retro Cac, Luke, what's up Luke? Rock Music Forever 90. Junker, thank you for subscribing on Twitch. I appreciate that, my friend. Very kind of you. Let's see who else is with me here on YouTube. The legendary Jim Horror Fruit, Gypsy Warrior, Anthony Jordan Movies, and more. That thumbnail was actually my head on Robert Stack's body. Jeez. Borderline 11 says he's out of here. Says he left Lorne's stream to watch me talk on the phone. So is my talking on the phone not is that not now if you knew who I was talking to, you'd know. But anyway. Mr. Bombastic is here. Jonathan, what's up? Madcap Skills, hello. Hope you guys are doing well out there. No problem. Love Unsolved Mysteries. You got me. All right, man. Thank you, Junker. Awesome. Favorite horror movie, Killer Cutie? That would be Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I've got people in the chat saying that is like everybody streaming tonight? Is like did everybody choose Friday to? Well, I guess it's a good night. It's a good Friday tube stream because there's no Joe Bob's Drive-In. So it's a good Friday to be streaming. But I've got a good unsolved mystery for you guys tonight. The last one I did, in which I included Cindy James and the Whackers. That one got took down on YouTube. It was blocked. FilmRise blocked it. But it is still available on my Twitch channel, which that was such a fun stream. It sucks that, FilmRise decided to take it down, but hey, it's all good. Yeah. Grant F, what's up? As told by Gonzo, what's up? How's everything going in Seattle? The Cindy James episode really creeped you out? This one's pretty good too. Are you going to check out the new Unsolved Mysteries July 1st? I will, but I mean my expectations are going to be pretty low because it's just not going to be the same. You know what I mean? It's just not going to be the same. But yeah. But the unsolved mystery that I have for you guys tonight, this is a good one. I don't know, are any of you familiar with the Circleville letters? Anybody familiar with that? Sting of the Scorpion, you are. Okay, cool. Actually, Unsolved Mysteries did a pretty good segment on the Circleville letters. But they're, like with so many Unsolved Mysteries episodes, they really just scratched the surface of, they really only scratched the surface of the case. Horror Gal Susan, what's up? How are you doing? Jason Neal, hello. So some people have heard of Circleville, of the Circleville letters. Some people have not. So this will be a good one for you guys. It's a little creepy. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. But I do have another YouTuber is going to be helping me with this one tonight. If you guys are familiar with John Lorden, the Lorden Arts YouTube channel, he gave me permission to show some of his video on the Circleville letters on this stream. So I want to give him a shout out. There's a link to his channel in the description. He does some of the most insightful, well thought out, just highly detailed videos talking about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and disappearances. So you guys should definitely go and check him out. His channel's fantastic. And he was, of course, nice enough to let me use footage from his video on the Circleville letters in this stream, which I'll be doing that, and I'll be commenting over it, and I'll be pausing it and stuff like that. Lord Archer, subscribed, Susan. So let me give you guys a little bit of background, just a very tiny bit of background here on the Circleville letters. It started in I believe it was 1976. Yes. In a small town called Circleville in Ohio. And people started receiving letters from an anonymous author. Basically, someone who knew way too much about people's lives in this town. And some of them were threatening. And this case covers everything. This thing is just so deep. Every time you peel away a layer, there's 20 million other layers. So this is an absolutely fascinating case. And as we get deeper and deeper into it, it's got some it's cover up. There's possibly a cover up. People are being framed. There's possibly murder. There's attempted murder. It's insane. It is insane. So without further ado, I'm going to shrink myself here, and I'm going to let John do an introduction for the case. He's going to give us the specifics, peel that onion of horror. Well, I'm going to let John do that for us right now. So here we go. Let me know about the levels. Am I too loud? Is he too loud? If you guys haven't dropped a like on the stream on YouTube, please do so. I would certainly appreciate it. So here we go.
Moving over to the lineup.com. This is a pretty good write-up. I've been noticing what I consider like the blog write-up of this story. It's a little simplistic. Some of the facts don't seem to line up if you do a deeper dive in that. So I'm going to include a couple of those in the sources below. I'll try to point out if there's anything wildly inconsistent. I don't think there is on this one, but let's just jump in and get started. In 1976, the citizens of Circleville, Ohio began receiving sinister handwritten letters. The anonymous author knew many personal details about each resident and claimed to be watching them. They were postmarked from nearby Columbus without a return address. Moving over to historicmysteries.com, let's learn some more. The letters contained threats of violence and personal information that in some cases only the recipient was aware of. Many of these letters were hatefully written with vulgarisms and lewd artwork. None of the Circleville letters had any return address, and all appeared to come from somewhere within Columbus. I have seen a few instances of examples that also they were postmarked within Circleville, so not quite all of them came from Columbus, but we're talking the vast majority, and we're talking a lot of letters to the tune of more than 1,000 letters. Every single letter was written in the same distinct style, block letters, and might have been an attempt to cover up the author's personal handwriting. I already showed you some examples where it's not every letter is written in the same exact style. As a matter of fact, some of the letters were even typewritten. So just keep that in mind as we roll.
I'm going to pause it there for a second. I'm going to show you guys an example of the letters. This is the Unsolved Mysteries wiki page. And let's see. Where'd that? Oh goodness, I don't know where I'm at here. Okay, this is one of the first letters that was received. And ooh, that's not good size. Let me see if I can shrink this a little bit so you guys can see it better. All right, so that is one of the original letters that was sent. Why is that not going to change? That is actually, I think. Oh, this is acting really weird. Why is this acting weird today? All right, so this is a different letter. For some reason, this little pop-out is acting strange today. It wasn't doing that the other day. But this is another letter from the Circleville writer. And if you notice, they're quite different. This is the letter that was actually sent to Unsolved Mysteries when they were going to come to Circleville and do their little segment. So as you can see there, this is a later Circleville letter, and look at how blocky the writing is there. And this is one of the original letters that was sent. And it's very different as far as how it was written out. Very long, slim handwriting there. One thing that is similar, though, is how each sentence is ended with one of these semicolon things. As you can see there, stay away from Massey, and it's like the little, colon. That's strange. But if you look on some of the other letters, they also end the sentences with the colon. So keep that in mind as we dig deeper into this case, because there is a real possibility that there's possibly more than one letter writer. So keep that in mind.
Forward here. Even though many of the town's 14,000 inhabitants were targeted, one woman was seemingly singled out for some severe and or harsh treatment. Mary Gillespie drove a school bus for a living and was among the initial targets. In addition to revealing disturbing facts, such as her home being under surveillance by the author and that she was a married mother, the letter also contained an allegation that Gillespie was having an affair with a superintendent of schools. In no uncertain terms, the author demanded that she stop. Several additional letters were sent to her, all of a similar nature. At first, the terrified woman just hid them all away, until one of the Circleville letters arrived addressed to Ron Gillespie, Mary's husband. Of course, the letter wound up spilling the beans and telling Ron what his wife was up to with this superintendent. Ron was ordered to put an end to the affair or die. So we have a very direct threat here. From the stuff that I've read that was sent to Mary, she was not being threatened in quite that way. It was kind of speaking more about, I know about your children, kind of assuming that there were other ways that they would be able to harm her, but not a direct threat to her. Ron was the first one that appeared to get a very direct threat where you have to do something about this or something's going to happen to you. I know about where you work. I know that you have a red and white truck, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me pause it there just for a second. And for those of you who may not live in small towns or may not have ever lived in a small town, I'm sure even if you haven't, I'm sure you've heard the saying that small towns harbor no secrets. And you have to keep the fact that this takes place in a small town in mind as we go on, because there's a lot of small town politics, a lot of small town nepotism, and that kind of thing going on here. As a matter of fact, let me show you this video. This is John talking about Circleville, the town. So let's get an idea of the town of Circleville before we go any further.
Learn a little bit more about Circleville really quickly. Jumping over to wikipedia.org, Circleville is a city in and the county seat of Pickaway County, Ohio. The population was 13,314 at the 2010 census. Now, these letters occurred starting in the mid-1970s. So if we just check out the historical population, we can see that it was about over 11,500 back then. Still a relatively smaller community. We can see it here kind of in the center of Ohio. Obviously known for the pumpkin show. I've seen people in threads talking about that in a few places as well. Even though these letters started in the mid-70s, they continued for quite a while, like 20 years. And there's a very interesting twist in the scope of those letters continuing, because the person that everyone thought was doing it was incarcerated for 10 of those 20 years. But we'll get to that aspect of the story in a little bit.
So we're talking about a very, very small town, very, very small town, where in small towns, everybody knows everybody else's secrets, but it's some of the darkest secrets that people talk about, but they don't. There's a very good possibility that everybody in this town knows who the Circleville Rider is. They just don't want to come forward with it, put it that way. And also in a small town, you're talking about a woman who, she's a bus driver, but she still works for the school system, and she's allegedly having an affair with the superintendent. Now, school teachers and people associated with like the school board in small towns, those people are almost like pillars of the community. Everybody knows them. And it happened in my small town. If a teacher was having an affair with another teacher, everybody knew about it. And in small towns, there's not a whole lot to do in small towns aside from gossip. So you have a case here of a school bus driver who's allegedly having an affair with the school superintendent. And my cat just jumped down and freaked me out. But, and I've totally lost my train of thought now. But You have a woman who's a school bus driver who's allegedly having an affair with the school superintendent. So literally anybody in this town could be a suspect because of how gossip spreads in small towns. That makes it kind of interesting too. Hey Aaron, what's up? How are you doing? Hey Dave, what's going on? How are you? Kowloon Reloaded, what's up? How's it going? Always some political sex scandals behind so many things like this. Yes. Well, it goes, yeah, lots and lots going on in this case. But yeah, it's odd if you've never lived in a small town. I used to say small towns harbor no secrets, which is true, but they also harbor some of the darkest secrets. And I think this is one. There's a lot of secrets being harbored in this town. We soon want to discover. You want to see the cat? She is jet black from head to toe. She has no other color on her. Jet black. So she is stealthy. She is very well hidden. Yeah, she's quite a little cat. Mean as can be. I've got bite marks all over my wrist where she just turned on me the other night while I was petting her, and she just attacked my wrist and just bit chunks out of me. She's a wildcat. What's up, Toronto Freddy? Hey, Captain Tim. Every town has an M Street. That's true. That's true. So let's go back to the story here with Mr. Lorden.
Both Ron and Mary worked together to try and ignore the threats and intimidation and carry on. Another chilling letter quickly changed that. Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBs, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out. You might see that it looks like it says CBS here. I've read several articles on this and seen some people even discussing the aspect. It's supposed to be CBs. I don't think that a person that's trying to remain anonymous has connections at CBS where they're going to get this type of information broadcast. But now this article at Historic Mysteries, this next paragraph, some of this stuff is not true. So I'm actually going to read it and then tell you guys where it's incorrect, because I've seen it repeated so often, and I've seen other places that have better information where we...
Here's another interesting point about this case. There's so much misinformation about this case out there, and some people chalk that up to just, people not having their facts straight, and then some other people chalk that up to the fact that there is a cover-up going on as well. So there's people spreading misinformation about the case in order to misdirect people. So keep that in mind also.
We know that this isn't how it happened. The couple began to deliberate about who the possible Circleville letter writer could be. Their suspicions centered on Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour. No, it didn't. Not at this point. It absolutely did not. They actually invited Ron's sister and Paul, who was Ron's sister's husband, over to their home. They told them about the letters. They all thought that they knew who was writing the letters, and they decided to write that person some letters saying, hey, we know who you are, stop doing this. And it appeared that that worked for a brief period of time, that the letters did seem to stop for a very short period of time. So if you're reading up on this and you see this, that, that Ron and Mary basically thought that it was their brother-in-law right from the start, that is not accurate, and I have read plenty of information to support that is not accurate.
Here's another interesting thing, and we're going to hear a lot about this Paul Freshour guy as we progress. But here's another interesting thing, and I don't think John mentions this in his video, and I've never heard anyone in any other video or anything else that I've read about this case discuss who they thought it was. So Mary Gillespie her husband's sister, and Paul Freshour, who was their brother-in-law, got together, had a meeting of the minds, and they determined that they thought it was such and such a person was responsible for these letters. So they wrote that person a letter telling them to stop. Who was this person? No clue. No clue. I don't think that person's ever been named. That's something that I think is really, that's a huge loose end. I think a huge loose end.
But let's move on. August 19th, 1977. The phone rang. Ron answered. Mary never did find out what was said or who made the call, but it was assumed to be the phantom author. Ron lost his temper, grabbed his pistol, and left the house. At an intersection close to where they lived, Ron's vehicle struck a tree and killed Ron Gillespie. When the police investigated the crash, they discovered that Ron's gun had been fired once. Detectives could find no reason or excuse for Ron to have fired at all, whether it was deliberate or not. The crash happened moments after Ron drove away, and no shot was reported. A postmortem examination recorded that Ron's blood alcohol level was 1.5 times the legal limit. I've seen it reported as it was at 0.16. I'm very curious about the shot that was supposedly fired, and I can't find very good detail on this. It seems like Ron got drunk, which apparently was strange for him. Several of his friends have noted this is not the type of guy that was a hard drinker or anything like that. Did the phone call upset him to the point where he felt like he had to get some liquid courage and go talk to someone about what was going on? Possibly. That someone that he was going to talk to, he felt like he needed to be armed for some reason. In the Unsolved Mysteries episode, there is kind of this assumption that it was definitely the Circleville writer that called him, and that he went and grabbed his gun, got in his truck, and went to go meet this person somewhere, even though the Circleville writer said that he was watching Ron's home at that time, which we're talking about 1977. You don't have cell phones. And if it's someone that lived close enough to be watching Ron's home or his vehicle, why would Ron have needed to get in his truck if he knew who this person was, to the point where he was going to go have a confrontation with this person and had to arm himself? There's a lot about this that really doesn't make sense. Some people question if the investigation done by the local sheriff, the same sheriff that was mentioned at the beginning of this episode in the letter that I showed you that went to Unsolved Mysteries, did they really do a good job on this investigation? I'm not sure. But what we do have is his blood alcohol level is high. His car was wrecked into a tree. There was a gun with him, and one of the bullets had been fired. A consideration I don't see people really talk about is, what if that bullet was fired at a completely different time and he just didn't empty the empty cartridge out of the gun? What if he just left it in there because he knew he had several more shots and he just put it away in his drawer or whatever?
I wanted to, let me jump in here real quick. As somebody who is a gun owner, you just don't do that. You don't fire off a round out of your gun and then just put the gun away, knowing that you've got a spent shell in it or whatever. You just don't do that. I've never heard of anybody doing that. So the assumption that he fired off one round out of his revolver and then just said, I'll just, and then just forgot about it. I don't know, that does not make any sense to me. It could happen. I mean, it could happen, but it makes absolutely no sense to me. Now, at the same time, John mentioned the fact that his blood alcohol level was above the legal level, that he was intoxicated. I don't know if John mentions this either, but there's a lot of speculation about, was he was his blood alcohol level that high? Because everybody who knew Ron knew that he was not a big drinker. And when he did drink, he didn't drink very much. Now, he was home alone with his children. So was that the time that you would just sit and drink to get drunk? And whoever called him here angered him enough that he would leave his kids alone, grab his gun, and take off to go meet someone to confront them. Because keep in mind, the letter that he received was a direct threat to him. Now, the letters that his wife received, they weren't directly threatening her, but they were saying, I know where you live, I know you got kids, kind of indirectly threatening the kids, which, I mean, to me, I would take that as a more personal threat than a direct threat to me. But again, we have this guy who splits at night, leaving his kids alone. Was he really drunk? According to the police, he was. Who was he going to meet? Why did he grab his gun before he split? One round was maybe fired out of it, but I mean, they could have checked couldn't they have checked forensically to tell like the gun was recently fired? I don't know. What do you guys think? Are there any gun owners out there? What do you think about Big Crack Rock? You have 17 guns. I had to cut myself off years ago. Owning a gun doesn't make any sense to you, T. Bob. We don't know. He had a revolver. It was a .22 caliber revolver. And when they discovered his truck wrapped around the tree, they found the revolver inside. And it was loaded except for one empty shell because it had been fired. There was no signs of the gun being fired inside the truck. So they could have checked his hand for gunpowder residue. Yes, they could have. Absolutely. But apparently they did not. Hey, Brian Trash, what's up? How are you doing? All right, so let's continue on. Now we have a potential murder on our hands linked to the Circleville letter writer.
There's nothing to necessarily assume that he took fresh ammo and just reloaded the gun right before he got into the truck. If I was going to have a face-off with someone, I probably would. I'd probably check and make sure that there was fresh ammo in the gun. But if you're drunk, are you going to necessarily think about that? I'm not sure. There's no mention of, they know that he shot the bullet because they found the bullet in a nearby tree, or they saw that it went through his window, or they saw that it accidentally fired in the accident because it was jostled or something like that. There is no information about that gunshot. Gunshot residue being on his hand, which I don't even think was really an investigative tool back then.
That's a very good. You make a very good point there, Anthony. Yes. Sometimes people who own revolvers will keep one chamber empty so that there's no accidental discharge. This chamber had an empty shell in it. And I knew a guy who owned a revolver growing up, and he kept his revolver that way, but he didn't. He just kept the chamber empty. Ron's chamber had a spent shell in it. So I understand him maybe wanting to leave the one chamber empty so that there's no accidental discharge, but why leave an empty shell in that chamber?
Nothing. So it's really, really strange. When we boil this down, we have a woman who might or might not be having an affair, someone writing letters to her family talking about this affair, upsetting them so badly that the husband decides that he's going to go out and talk to someone about this, and he never makes it. He basically winds up driving his truck into a tree. Or did he? Did something else happen? Was someone waiting in his truck? If that person was the same person on the phone, once again, we just have to keep in mind this couldn't have been a cell phone call. So you would have had maybe people, more than one person working together if they were going to try to ambush him in some way like that, or harm him like that, which I just don't know if it's very feasible in this case. I wish, of all that I've looked into with this case, I wish there was a lot more information about this crash. It'd be great to see a police report on this, just to get a better sense of what really happened on this night, because this becomes a bit of a sticky point for his brother-in-law later. And I don't know if I don't think that anyone really has the answer to this. I don't even know if the sheriffs that investigated this really know what happened in this instance. But let's get back to the story and continue. The Circleville letters began once more in earnest, as well as Mary Gillespie and her immediate family. Elected officials were also targeted.
Oh, one other thing I want to mention. The first series of letters that I showed you guys, let me see if I've still got that pulled up. That is the handwriting on the first series of letters before Ron's death. After Ron's death, more letters started to appear, but these new letters looked like that. So, is it the same person? Are we talking about two different writers? Or are we talking about the same person who decided to change things up? Like maybe they were writing with, they wrote this series of letters with their non-dominant hand. There's similarities between the first set of letters and these second set of letters, particularly the punctuation. But they're very different. This tells me that there's a very, very, very good possibility that there are two letter writers. Now, are they working in conjunction? The plot will thicken. And then thicken and then thicken more here momentarily. And we're going to get into an area where there's a very good possibility that there was one person responsible for the first set of letters prior to Ron's death, and then a second person responsible thereafter. And that the two may not have even been working together. It's very strange, very strange. All right, let's get back to John.
Mary admitted to the affair taking place, but insisted that it only began after the first of the letters had been delivered. I have read a lot of people talking about this case, analyzing this case. Nobody believes that's true. I have not found one comment thread from anybody saying, oh, well, yeah, that seems reasonable. You start getting letters from some mystery person about you having an affair with someone. You're not having an affair with them, but after you get these letters that are threatening your family, sure, you decide to go ahead and have an affair with them. It literally does not make sense. But what we do have here is her at least admitting, yes, there is an affair going on between her and the superintendent of the school. Let's continue. Despite all of this harassment and the scandal that made her the talk of the town, Mary managed to keep her job. 6 years after the campaign had began, whoever was behind this took a bold step in furthering their tactics. While at work, Mary noticed a sign en route that threatened the life of her daughter. Angered by this, she stopped the bus and removed the sign. She noticed a box tied with a string to another post. Inside was a crude booby trap in the form of a pistol. Thankfully, the trap failed to execute at all. She called the police, and they quickly discovered that someone had made a crude attempt to file off the gun's serial number. Police traced the gun to Freshour, who, not for the first time, insisted he knew nothing about the events. Freshour stated that the gun went missing long before. So this is a very interesting turn, and that was a very brief way of telling what actually happened here. She's driving the bus. She's taking kids to school. She sees this sign that mentions her daughter. I've seen that it's vulgar. I've seen that it's threatening, but I have not seen the exact wording that was on the sign. She goes and she sees that there's a box that is attached to this sign, but she takes the whole thing into the school bus. She doesn't open it at the side of the road. She doesn't contact police and say, hey, there's something out here that has to do with this harassment I've been going through. Can you guys check it out? And police up to this point have talked to her about how to properly collect evidence if there's something like this going on. For some reason, she ignores all of that, but she brings this box into the school bus. She takes the kids to school. She drives home and then decides, hey, I'm going to try to see what's in this box while I'm sitting at home. She pries the lid off. She says that it's been heavily glued and it took a lot of prying for her to pop it open. She sees a gun in there that's being held with styrofoam, basically keeping it in the right position for shooting at the right angle. And she kind of thinks, well, it's probably not a real gun. Could be a starter pistol or something along those lines. And apparently she doesn't report it to police for a few hours. Some other things are going on at home. She goes through those things first and then goes, oh, well, I better take this gun or this box with a gun in it to the police.
See, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. And now I've heard two different stories. John mentions that she takes the box. Here's what's crazy about the situation. She sees signs on the side of the road. So whoever set these signs up, they know her bus route in the morning. They know that she's going to see them. And they've made them either so profane or graphic that they knew that she would get out of her bus and go and take them down. So I can understand her stopping the bus and getting out and going and taking them down. However, when she discovers that one of the signs is attached to a box on a post by a string, nothing crosses her mind that that's odd. She takes the box off the post into her school bus. And this is before she picks up any kids. Now, John mentions what he reads tells him that she waited until she got home to open it. I've also heard that she opened it on the bus and discovered that there was a gun inside of it and still went and did her bus route with the gun on the bus. Now, this wasn't a revolver, which starter pistols are like, typically they kind of look like revolvers. This was an automatic pistol. This did not look anything like this was a pistol. There's no doubt about it. This was a pistol. So that's out there. But even if she waited until she got home to open the box, I don't know, that just sounds really, I don't know, that none of it sounds plausible to me. And then when she does realize, okay, so there's a gun inside this box, there's a string tied to the trigger of the gun that's attached to the sign. So if I pulled the sign, it would squeeze the trigger and the gun is pointed directly at me. It still doesn't cross her mind that this could be a booby trap and that my life was in danger at that very moment. So she sets the thing aside for hours to, I don't know. What was she doing for all that time before she finally said, okay, let's take this. Maybe we should take this to the police now. Maybe we should report this. That That makes no sense to me whatsoever. All right, let's continue.
So her steps around all that are very questionable. And because of the fact that she moved it, the investigation into that area is a little bit tampered with. They still are able to go there, check. They find some footprints. I think they find tire prints as well. But that's about it. There's nothing else really in the area that helps them determine what happened there. We're going to get to some testimony from someone else from that morning as well that might give us a bit of clarification into it. But let's continue here. Fresh Hour takes handwriting test. Police had Fresh Hour take a handwriting test in which he had to copy some of the Circleville letters. The investigation was criticized for the incorrect manner for administering the handwriting test. The sheriff was satisfied that Fresh Hour was a Circleville letter writer, or that the handwriting was close enough at least, and he arrested Fresh Hour for attempted murder. The trial began in late October 1983, and even though he had an alibi for the day of the Booby Trap attempt on Mary's life, he was convicted. Fresh Hour maintained his innocence until his death in 2012. And what's interesting is he was incarcerated for 10 years based on that charge, and the letters continued. Letters went to the sheriff. Letters even went to Fresh Hour in jail, talking to him. So it's pretty curious, because if you look into at least what Fresh Hour says about the court proceedings, and he has a huge document that he has released. I think it's over 120 pages or so, 164 pages. A big part of the trial and a big part of his conviction has to do with those letters, and essentially getting the judge to believe that he was part of writing those letters, and that those letters were written by the same person that made this sign with this booby trap. And for me, that is the weakest point of this whole case after looking into it, is the association between the booby trap and the letters. Now, the thing is, there was multiple signs that were being left around, supposedly by the same person that was writing the letters.
Here's something else that just makes absolutely no sense to me. So, if you're going to commit a murder using a weapon that can be linked directly back to you, would you do a half-hearted job of scratching off the serial number? Now, I've heard that John mentioned that it was a crude job of scratching off the serial number. I've also heard that only half of the serial number was scratched off. Either way, the serial number was still very legible. So, if you're going to commit a murder with a weapon that can be directly linked back to you, I would jackhammer off the freaking serial number. I'm not doing a half-hearted, I'm not doing a crude job, I'm not scratching off half of the serial number. I'm going to freaking jackhammer that serial number off of there. Very, very fishy, but we're going to learn why it's so fishy here momentarily. And again, keep in mind, Fresh Hour was a brother-in-law to Mary Gillespie and Ron. At this point, he was no longer related to them because he had gotten a divorce. In that divorce, he took everything. He discovered that his wife was cheating on him, and John covers this momentarily, but he discovered that his wife was cheating on him. He divorced her. She got nothing. He got custody of the kids. He got the house. She got no money. Nada. Nada. Shortly thereafter, his gun that mysteriously disappeared shows up, and the serial number has only been half-heartedly scratched off of it.
But to link this one specific sign to the letter writer, I haven't found anything that's been very strong in terms of deciding that. But the court of public opinion, I mean, there was articles being written about this all over the place. Some of these articles actually stated that he himself had admitted to writing some of the letters, and he has refuted that. In his paperwork, he's very clear that he never admitted to that, that once again, this is the sheriff lying to protect a sloppy investigation and not really finding the Circleville writer. So very, very strange things going on in this case. While serving his time, Fresh Hour was considered to be a model prisoner. In the decade that he was incarcerated, the letters carried on regardless. All postmarked Columbus, and Fresh Hour was not sentenced to prison anywhere near Columbus. Even the prison wardens doubted that Fresh Hour was guilty of writing the letters. And they had a really good reason to. Not only was there strict policies about letters coming in or leaving the jail, everything is checked. He was being physically checked whenever he was meeting with someone. He was strip searched before and after he would meet with them. They even had periods of time where they put him in solitary confinement specifically to make the letters stop, and the letters didn't stop. They were still going out while he was in solitary. So the authorities at the jail were convinced he is not sending these new letters. As a matter of fact, they even put him to a polygraph test and specifically asked him about those letters. Does he have anything to do with those letters since his incarceration? But they also touched on the letters that were brought up in his trial. He said, no, I do not have anything to do with writing those letters. And he passed. Take that for what it's worth, because we're talking about lie detector tests. But really, really interesting stuff here, and it's just unfortunate that he's no longer around to defend himself. From what I see, he did have a blog, but it looks like it's been taken down since. I will have a link to his long document in the description box below, so you can dive into that. If you're really going to look into this case, I think you have to go through that document. It's got pieces of the court transcripts, which it's the only location where I've been able to find that stuff. It's a little frustrating because you'll be reading a court transcript and all of a sudden it'll just stop and he'll jump to a different document, or he'll jump around within the conversation. But the first 30 pages are all written by him and his feelings about what's going on, that this is basically a large type of conspiracy that is going on between the sheriff and the school district and some other people, all covering up these bad, evil things that they're doing. What's strange about what he wrote in those first 30 pages is the tone of it is basically supporting the Circleville writer. He's basically saying, hey, the stuff that this writer was saying, a lot of it is true if you actually look into it. And his letter is written to the FBI. He's trying to get the FBI to look into this at some level. So it's weird because when I first started reading that letter, I was like, wow, it really seems like, he's supporting the Circleville writer. So isn't it possible that he is actually the writer, that, he's trying to, once again, get people to believe this message that he's putting out, just in a bit of a different way. However, when you consider he's in jail, the letters are still going out, he takes a polygraph, he passes, it gets pretty tough. While he was in prison, he even received...
One thing, if I understand being the Circleville letter writer was only sort of half of the reason why he got convicted for the attempted murder, but they also think he's the Circleville letter writer. If all these letters are still going out while he's in prison, and there's no way he could be responsible for these letters, then what does that tell you? Why was that not looked into more? And John mentioned this, I believe, when he was being questioned by the sheriff. the sheriff handed him one of the letters. And to take a handwriting comparison, he handed Freshour one of the known Circleville letters and said, copy that. In other words, make your writing look exactly the same. So it's that, of course, sounds very suspicious on the part of the sheriff, but also, why would Freshour do that? Wouldn't Freshour have realized, like, wait a minute, I'm being set up here. I'm not, why would, I mean, that seems pretty obvious to me, and yet he did it anyway.
Received a letter that stated, "Now, when are you going to believe you aren't going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all." That letter strikes me a little weird.
He also had an airtight alibi for the day of the attempted, when this booby trap was discovered. He had an airtight alibi. Still sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Is he trying to make it sound like, I mean the author, I don't mean Paul, is the author trying to make it sound like the letter is coming from the sheriff or coming from someone that was actually prosecuting Paul in some way? I don't know. Just that section in the middle about when we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all? If nothing else, it's alluding to the fact that this letter writer was writing to Paul previous to this, and I really haven't heard any mention of that before, or that this person was having a conversation with Paul, maybe even face to face. And I haven't heard him really give out any theories about who that would be necessarily. So moving over to mysteriousuniverse.org, we get a little bit of insight into someone else that might have seen who was setting up that booby trap. Mary Gillespie told the sheriff one of the other bus drivers told her that she had been driving that same road about 20 minutes before Mary Gillespie found that booby trap at exactly that site. And when she went by that very same intersection, there was a yellow El Camino parked there. A large man with sandy hair was standing there. When he saw her come, he turned around and acted like he was going to the bathroom or something, but seemed also to be avoiding any kind of identification. The description of the individual does not fit Paul Freshour at all, and Paul had a very solid alibi for this time. There was no attempt at all to follow up on that lead. If they had, they would have found that another possible suspect in this case had a brother who had a yellow El Camino.
Another thing about small towns, this is an El Camino we're talking about here. This isn't a Chevy Malibu or a Ford Escort or an Impala, a very, very common vehicle. I'm going to wager that in Circleville there was maybe 1 or 2 people who owned an El Camino. And of those 2, only one of them owned a yellow El Camino. And that person has a direct link to Paul Freshour, and an even more direct link to someone who really does not like Paul Freshour. Was this person investigated? No, but we're going to find out more about that momentarily.
So here we're getting some other potential angles. Could someone accidentally mistake someone's hair for being sandy versus the dark hair that Paul had? Possibly, but there is some footprint analysis that is done at the scene. I saw in Paul's documentation, he actually has some notes from someone that was hired to analyze those footprints, and it seems like Paul's foot is far too small to be the same shoe that made those footprints. So there is some pretty good question here about, was he really that person or not? And who could the owner of that yellow El Camino be? Well, let's press on forward here. And since we're covering an Unsolved Mysteries case, why not get some info from unsolvedmysteries.wikia.com? Once again, we can see they've got a little slideshow of the letters here, showing some of what I question in terms of maybe there was more than one letter writer. We've just got some very different type of text going on between a couple of these letters, but let's get some more detail. Ron received a phone call from the alleged writer. The call seemed to confirm Ron's suspicions on the identity of the writer. He grabbed his gun and left in his pickup truck, even though the writer claimed to be watching the truck. A few minutes later, Ron was found dead. So I just wanted to let you guys hear how it was worded by Unsolved Mysteries. I don't know if you can really support that information. Only his children were there apparently, and he told his children that he was leaving. I don't think he said to his kids, you know, hey, yeah, I found out who this guy is. I'm going to grab my gun and go confront him. So I don't know where this assumption quite comes from. Several residents soon received letters stating that Sheriff Radcliffe had been involved in a cover-up. And once again, if you look at Paul's information that he sent to the FBI, it's lining up with the type of content that the writer is sending out to the public, talking about the sheriff being involved in a cover-up. Apparently, this is a second-generation Radcliffe to be in that role, and the Radcliffe family has been sheriffs in this area. It was for like 60 or 70 years or something. So is it potentially, you know, a family that's been in power a little too long that might have gone corrupt? I think it's something that should be considered.
Another small town kind of thing. You're talking about small town politics, and you're talking about nepotism. When people get into a position of power, like a sheriff, and a sheriff in a small town has an enormous amount of power. When that person retires, that the next one in line is usually a son, a daughter, a son-in-law, a very close family member, to keep that power in-house, in the bloodline, so to speak. And there's another thing about this sheriff that is interesting too. The sheriff, and I don't know if John goes over this or not, but the sheriff was up for some sort of, he was going to be president of the National Sheriff's Association or something like that. He was in the running for that. And so he needed an end to this case, so that this case was not hanging over his head when he was voted upon, or however he was going to get that seat. And that was a very sought after seat. Thank you for subscribing. I realize that may have been a little loud. I apologize. But, Big Crack Rock, thank you for the gifted sub. Appreciate that. Very kind of you, my friend. But yeah, that's something else to keep in mind. Again, we're talking about small town politics. We're talking about small town corruption and small town nepotism. So that's what it's sounding like a lot here. And particularly in the case of Paul. But I don't know, for some reason, I think Paul knows, or I think Paul knew, because he's no longer with us, I think he knew more of what was going on than he'll ever let on. But let's proceed.
The trap had a box which contained a small pistol. If Mary had pulled the sign off a certain way, the gun would have fired. I have a big question about that, because how bad was this trap that it didn't fire? And even in some of the court documentation, there's constant notes about how shoddy this trap was. What is the likelihood that she would be able to pull it down? She didn't realize that it was a trap. She didn't realize that until she got home. And even then, she didn't believe the gun was real. So the way that she was treating that object, I can't imagine that she was being gentle because she thought something might go wrong or that there could be an explosive or something like that in there. Oh, and by the way, she's taking it onto a school bus with a bunch of kids. It really makes no sense. So some people do question the trap. Was it even at that location to begin with? Did Mary possibly have this at her home? Is she involved in some way in this setup? Something very interesting that happened around this is Paul and his wife wound up separating and getting a divorce, and his wife moved onto the property that Mary lived on. And apparently Mary and his ex-wife were very close. And if you think about this, who would have access potentially to a weapon that was owned by Paul? His ex-wife certainly would. Now keep in mind, the ex-wife of Paul is actually Ron's sister. So she could also be a suspect in this herself. When you start looking into this, it's just like a spider web of possibilities, and every one you go out on, it just branches off into more and more different directions. It was determined that the gun had belonged to Paul Freshour, who had recently separated from Ron's sister. Paul, however, claimed that the gun had been stolen. And I don't know if it was great for him to claim that the gun had been stolen versus I don't know where it is, because apparently he stored this gun in his garage. And because he claimed that it was stolen, when he eventually was up for trial, they were able to ask, well, did you report this as stolen? And of course, police were able to go through those records and say, no, we never had any report that a gun had been stolen from this guy. So that just him phrasing that he thought that the gun could have been stolen was probably not the smartest thing for him. Paul took Sheriff Radcliffe to his garage and showed him where he kept his gun. One of the other interesting things is when they were there, the defense asked the sheriff, hey, while you were there, did you notice any ammo for this gun? Did you find ammo where this gun was stored? No. Then they started going into the materials that made up the booby trap. Did you find this type of twine? Did you see this type of box? Did you see? And the sheriff was just replying, no, 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 no. So basically, all the items that it would take to build this booby trap that hopefully you would think they would try to trace back to their original locations, none of that stuff was found at Paul's home. On top of that, according to Paul's documentation, no, there was no fingerprints of his found on any of it, including his own gun.
That is a good point, Anthony. Why not? And maybe, I don't know, maybe Paul told the sheriff, well, I don't know where it is. I mean, maybe it was stolen or maybe he phrased it that way. Or again, we're talking about the sheriff here who there's been some, there's been more than a shadow of doubt put on him because, he wanted this case closed pretty quickly. So, I mean, I don't know.
Really, really bizarre. Although he was never charged with writing the threatening letters, they became a crucial part of the evidence against him. A handwriting expert testified that Paul was the letter writer. Mary also testified that she believed that he was the writer after his wife visited her with the same suspicion. Okay, so just keep this in mind. We've got a guy going through a divorce, and all of a sudden his wife, who might be the letter writer herself, and might already have a way of knowing about this affair, is going to the woman supposedly having this affair and saying, hey, it could be my husband that's writing these letters. Paul's boss also testified that he was not at work on the day that the booby trap was found. However, Paul did have an alibi for most of the day. However, he did not take the stand in his own defense. Probably another mistake, particularly if he was innocent, but I know that it depends on legal strategy. There's all kinds of other different considerations that come into play there. In terms of it being aired on Unsolved Mysteries, the original air date for this episode was November 11th, 1994. Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe and Mary Gillespie declined to be interviewed for the story. I'll have a link to the Dennis Farina episode in the description box below, and you'll see Paul is interviewed and speaks a lot throughout the story, so you can check that out for yourself. Recent information uncovered by Martin Yant and others has suggested that there were at least 3 letter writers involved in the case, none of whom were Paul. One was believed to be the son of the superintendent who Mary had an affair with. What's interesting about that is in some versions of this story, they talk about the letters being somewhat different and that some of the early letters were signed with a W. The superintendent's son's name is William. So it is possible that he could have been a writer of possibly some of the early letters only, maybe all the letters, but definitely that he could have been responsible for the letters directly talking about the affair. And when you think about the intent of this person and these letters that are being sent, why do they want this affair to end? I mean, that's what they're being very clear about. They want the affair to end. They want, when that doesn't seem to work, they go to Ron and they want him to conduct his own investigation and to tell the school board about it. It seems to me that the intent of this person to have that affair end would be probably to protect the superintendent's wife, which either it could have been the wife herself that was writing these letters or one of her children if they knew that this was going on. Outside of that, it could have been someone that might have been interested in Mary. Maybe was she having more than one affair? Could have also been someone that was also interested in the superintendent. Could there have been someone else that he was having an affair with that found out about Mary, and maybe he wasn't spending any time with the first girl anymore and she got mad and started writing these letters? It's just, I'm telling you guys, it's a spider web.
Martin Yant is a name that pops up a lot. And I think John's going to talk about him more in a while too. But he's an investigative journalist that went to Circleville to investigate the letter writers. Now, one of the suspects was a man, or one of the people who Yant believes was at least one of the letter writers, if not the first letter writer, was a guy who worked at the same school that Mary drove a school bus for, and he allegedly had the hots for her. She turned him down because everybody in the town, she turned him down. He either knew about the affair already with the superintendent, or he was made privy to that rumor, and he was the first letter writer as a way to kind of get back at her for spurning his advances. But let's go on here. And it's just so funny that, Paul Freshour's ex-wife keeps popping up here also. Again, Paul divorced her. Paul won everything in the divorce. She was left with absolutely nothing. She had access to the gun. She knew that the gun could be traced back to him. Her brother drives a yellow El Camino. She goes to Mary after Paul's been arrested and convinces her that Paul was the letter writer. Apparently never questioned, never investigated. She was never looked at. Not once.
The second was to believe to be a co-worker who was infatuated with Mary. The third was believed to be Paul's ex-wife, Ron Gillespie's sister. It is believed that the ex-wife's boyfriend was the man seen next to the El Camino on the day that the booby trap was discovered, one of her relatives had owned that type of car at the time. And the assumption here is that she borrowed the El Camino, but her boyfriend actually drove it and used that to go set up the sign and the Booby Trap, which is a really interesting twist. And the reporter that's talking about this, Martin Yant, notes that once he started releasing information about that yellow Camino, the reporter started getting death threats and threats of being sued. When I'm looking at this in hindsight of, researching this, Paul's ex-wife seems somewhat suspicious to me. Outside of that, if you look through all of Paul's documentation, it's really strange because there's this thing where it seems like he doesn't want to consider that, or he doesn't really go into the possibility that it was his ex-wife that was doing this. That would have been the perfect defense for him if he was in court. If he knew that his ex-wife was doing this, he could have brought that up and completely blown out this whole case. But he didn't. So to me, I'm wondering, was he protecting her for some reason? Maybe because he was part of it in some way. Maybe he didn't write the letters. Maybe she was the one writing the letters, but maybe he was helping her to investigate. Like maybe she caught wind that Mary was having this affair and he went and found out about it. If you read through what he wrote in that large document, he has some pretty intense detail about this affair. He knows where they would go on their halfway point when they were going off together to go stop, have a drink. He knows a lot of detail about the mechanics of how that affair worked. So could he have been kind of like the private eye for his wife, and then his wife was the letter writer, and then he didn't want her to get nailed? But then you consider that they go through a breakup and they get divorced. And essentially he wins everything. He gets the kids, he gets the house, he gets to keep his money. But then when he gets busted and he gets charged, all that goes back to her. Even his pension went to her. Wouldn't he be mad enough at that point to come clean and say, I know who did this. It was my wife that was doing this the whole time, my ex-wife. Well, in his documentation, he also states at one point that if you talk to her about things now, that there's no way she's going to lie because she has since become religious. There are another set of letters that come out way after all this goes down. We're not sure if it's the same writer or not because, once again, the font has changed. This person is now claiming that they know how the original writer was writing, and they explain that font. They say that there are more booby traps that have not been found, or at least weren't being reported by the authorities. And they specifically state that the old letters were written by a teacher named Mary. And they say that I told you about Mary because Jesus is with me now. I think it's pretty interesting and maybe a little more than coincidental that you have Paul talking about his ex-wife saying, oh yeah, she's religious now, so I would absolutely trust what she says. And then you have these new letters being delivered where someone is claiming, hey, I'm telling you about this because I'm religious now. And I have not seen anyone make that connection. Now, I haven't read through every single bulletin board there is out there on this, but I find that connectivity really, really interesting. I think that there could be something to that. Is his wife possibly only responsible for those last few letters written in a different font? Maybe she's trying to throw the investigation in a different direction. I don't know. Understanding the motivations in this case is really, really tough because there seems to be so much going on.
And again, that's part of the reason why I think Fresh Hour knew more than he let on. He did 10 years. 10 years. And if he even remotely thought that his wife or his ex-wife was in on it, why would he protect her? I don't know. There's just so many layers here. But I'm almost certain that he knew more. But he just didn't. I don't know. He was protecting someone. I just don't know why he would want to protect his ex-wife, who seemingly set him up to take this 10-year fall. And like John said, after he went away, she got the house, she got custody of the kids, and she got his pension. Everything that the divorce took away from her, she got back once he was in prison. So you've got motive. You've got she could have taken that gun at any time. And someone a relative of hers, I've heard it's her brother. John doesn't mention, he just says it's a relative. I've heard it was a brother, drove a yellow El Camino, which a yellow El Camino, and a man was saw near the site of the booby trap on the day that Mary discovered it. Everything is pointing at this woman who apparently found religion after all this was over with. That's a good time to find religion, right? Hey, Envy Davler, how are you doing? He didn't want her to get nailed. Yeah, but I don't know. Did he still love her? Was he concerned about his kids? Because, I don't know.
Now, Sitcoms Online does have a bulletin board thread going on this case. There's actually 2 separate threads. I'll have links to both of them down below. Really, really interesting reads. A lot of great theories going on in these. A couple of areas where it looks like family members potentially kicking in. It's tough. I don't know if they're believable or not. This one in particular is kind of interesting because it does call out, he says that he is the grandson of Paul, and it calls out that his grandmother's name is Karen, and that information isn't very widely known. In a lot of these conversations, people don't even seem to know the name of the superintendent, which is Gordon Massey. But if you dig into Paul's documentation enough, you can get all these details. So I don't know about the family, quote, family that is speaking on these threads, if that stuff's very reliable, but the rest of the threads are really interesting. And I was able to find links to a lot of other information, which I think is definitely worth your time if you're going to look into this case. Now, in another thread on Sitcoms Online, the Cars 1986, who's a senior member, and I believe I've talked about this account on the channel before. I really like their way of thinking and breaking things down. They reached out to the investigator / journalist that had his life threatened, Martin Yant, and they got a bit of a news story from him, and this is as of April of 2016. So let's see what this theory is about. It's interesting to note here that the letters they were receiving were written in 2 different forms. Some were written with a large block style writing, and others were written with a more normal style and were signed W. Gordon Massey's son was named William. They wrote, according to Paul, 4 or 5 letters to him, and that there was no violence in them or anything, just that we knew who he was and what he was doing, and we sent him the letters. Then the letters stopped. In the summer of 1977 is when Ron Gillespie received the phone call, which ultimately resulted in his death. Fast forward to 1983, which is when Mary Gillespie would see signs along her bus route.
Why would you, if you're going to write these anonymous letters, why would you sign them with the first letter of your name? That makes no sense to me. And again, you're in a small town. The superintendent, who's part of the affair, has a son named William. You've signed this letter with a W. That makes absolutely no sense. Why would you do that? That's like using a weapon to commit a murder that can be directly linked back to you, and you only scratch off half of the serial number.
Route that targeted her daughter. This is when she eventually found the booby trap attached to a sign. It should be noted that in 1982, Freshour and his wife went through a messy divorce, and Freshour kept their house and custody of their children. Not once during the proceedings did his wife mention anything about him being the writer. Then, after the divorce was finalized, his ex-wife moved into a trailer on the property where Mary Gillespie lived, and it was only after finding the booby trap that his ex began to claim he was responsible for writing the letters. Another worker for the school system had repeatedly made advances to Mary, which she rebuffed. When she began the affair with the superintendent, this made the guy jealous. All of the initial letters targeted the affair, and the initial letters were written in two different forms. In my opinion, the son of Gordon Massey wrote some, while the jealous co-worker wrote the others. It should be noted that Paul Freshour lived in a different county altogether and worked at a beer plant 50 hours a week. There's just no way he would have known the numerous people in Circleville, let alone intimate details about their lives. Now, what is interesting about where Paul worked is apparently he was in the right city for sending the letters. So he could have potentially been sending the letters from work. But Martin Yant's description of her in terms of Paul's ex-wife, quote, "She was a very, very angry, manipulative woman who was still planting negative stories about Paul in the early 1990s. One final tidbit, the co-worker was charged with the rape of a young girl and while on the run committed suicide. So this is a bit of a different spin because we have the coworker in this case being someone that Mary knew and that was attracted to Mary. I don't know if it could have been the flip situation that maybe this was a coworker that was also dating the superintendent. But in any regard, the letters do seem to circle around the school, at least this particular batch of letters. And it's tough because, as I told you guys, there was over 1,000 letters sent. However, for letters that wind up in this story and that are discussed in this story or that you can actually find for yourself, it's probably less than half a dozen. So it's hard to know the scope of these letters. Did they get into other people's personal lives as deeply as they did into the Gillespies or not? It's very, very hard to answer. But once again, a different twist on a possibility there, and just an interesting note about Paul's wife. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, Paul died at the age of 70, June 28th, 2012. His obituaries here just mentions that he had also served in the U.S. Army. He was a graduate of Franklin University, received a master's degree from Central Michigan University. This is a guy that was educated. Would he have made a bad decision in terms of trying to use a gun where he tried to file off the serial number but didn't do a good enough job and they were still able to trace it back to him? I struggle with that. Seems like he was probably a bit more educated and maybe a little smarter than doing something like that. Have the letters stopped now that Paul is dead? Yes, but they actually stopped a little bit before that as well. They did go on through the entire time that he was in prison. I'm not sure how long they went after he was released, but you had them consistently happen while he was in prison, and I don't know what was the catalyst for the letters ending. If it really was this other person that Mr. Yant was talking about, this person that might have been enamored with Mary, that killed himself when he was on the run, maybe that's why the letters stopped. Maybe the letters didn't serve Paul anymore once he was out of prison, and that's why the letters stopped. I don't know. I really don't know what the catalyst is for that. Were the letters sent by someone who wanted to protect Gordon's marriage, like one of his family members, or someone that wanted to end Mary's relationship with him, like one of her family members, or someone else just interested in her? Was she possibly having more than one affair, or could she have had an admirer? They do seem to be trying to end the affair and her marriage by sending a letter to her husband. Could it have been someone else that Gordon was having an affair with? And I think that's where I have to leave it. I don't know who else would be in consideration outside of that. It's someone with interpersonal knowledge of Mary and her family, and what's going on with her outside of her family. So in a way, I feel like it's someone that cares a lot and is close to either her or Ron or Gordon, the guy that she is also sleeping with, or possibly Gordon's wife, but it's someone that is close to this love triangle that is going on. I want to throw that your way and ask your opinions on it.
All right, I'm going to end that video there. But again, huge thanks to John for allowing me to use his video as a reference. As you can tell, just very, very well done video. Lots of information. He has a great channel. Again, go subscribe to him. The link to his channel is in the description. But yeah, again, so many loose ends with this case. I mean, what do you guys think? Give me some hypotheses as far as what do you think was going on here. I do not buy the superintendent's son being involved. I don't buy it. He may have known about it, but again, why would you write these letters and then put the first letter of your name on them? As far as the signature, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't make sense to me at all. You still think Mary Gillespie was the writer? You think she was writing the letters to herself? Interesting. What was Jeremy in the mood for today food-wise? McDonald's. He wanted McDonald's today. But and there's a lot with Martin Yant. John really only scratched the surface. Martin Yant has done extensive investigating of this case. And I agree with about 33.3% of his theory. My theory is there was, I agree with his take on the person who worked within the school system who was infatuated with Mary. She shot him down, and he started writing the letters because he knew about the affair, and this was his way of getting back at her. That's why the first series of letters look a very distinctive way. Now, what happened with Ron? Who called Ron? Why did he, Mary's husband, why did he grab his gun and run out into the night and ended up smashing his truck into a tree? I don't know. Clearly somebody called him. I mean, we really didn't get much information about Ron's life. Did Ron have enemies? Was Ron maybe having an affair himself? And that, who knows? We don't know that much about his life. So what sent him into a rage to grab his gun and run out of the house in the night to go and confront someone with a gun? It had to be pretty serious. Was he really drunk? Is that what caused him to crash his truck? Did he fire off a round at somebody? I don't know. That's a total loose end. I have no idea what happened from there. Or I have no idea what happened, what was up with that. No clue. But that was the point where the other letters came into play. These other letters that I think were obviously written by Paul Freshour's ex-wife. And you have Paul Freshour being set up with this booby trap. There's no doubt in my mind that was a complete setup. And any investigator with any it screamed, frame job. It screamed that he was being framed for this. And John mentioned at the end there that John Freshour had been in the Army. He'd served his country in the Army. This was a smart guy. He knew that, you know what I mean? You don't attempt to murder somebody with a weapon that can be directly linked back to you and just do a half-hearted job of scratching off the serial number. Um, she had the motive. She had the opportunity to take the gun. So, of course, the whole thing with the El Camino, and a relative of hers drove an El Camino of the same color. Everything points at her, but the local sheriff needed this case over. He needed someone behind bars, and Paul Freshour was that fall guy, because he had bigger plans as far as, being at the seat of this sheriff's committee or whatever it was. That is my theory. I think there were only 2 writers, but there were thousands of letters written, and who's to say that a lot of those other letters, a lot of them that weren't released, were just crackpots or people, because there had to be a lot of copycats. There's no doubt about that. There had to be copycats. So I don't know. What do you guys think? No, Bryn, you cannot. I can't show them. I actually showed some Unsolved Mysteries clips on my last stream where I was talking about Unsolved Mysteries, and that video got blocked all over the world. So can't show any clips from Unsolved Mysteries on here. No, tonight is just going to be about Circleville. I do have a couple other stories that I want to do. One of which is actually even weirder and creepier than this one. But even if the serial number was fully scratched off, they could still cross-reference the make and model against registered gun owners in the area. Exactly. So, I mean, and Paul Freshour, I'm sure, knew that. So, I don't know. But then again, I still think that Paul knew more than he let on. Sorry, it's just a really strange case. And if you guys want to dive even deeper into it, do a Google search of Martin Yant and look up some of the stuff that he wrote about the case. I believe in the beginning he believed that there were just 2 writers, and then later on he added the 3rd writer with the superintendent's son. So, what are the cases? I'm not going to say, because I don't know if I'm going to get permission to use clips from other videos as reference in them. Hopefully I will be, but we'll see. They're both very good. Very, very good. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Closing thoughts on the Circleville letters. Pretty freaky, pretty weird. A lot of moving parts in this case. Small town, you know what I mean? Small town politics, small town corruption. You got people having affairs. You've got mysterious letters from anonymous authors, threatening letters. You've got a potential murder. You've got an attempted murder. It runs deep, man. It runs deep. Sting of the Scorpion. Not what was not one of your favorite segments? You can watch Unsolved Mysteries on Pluto TV. Yeah, the Zodiac Killer's letters were, those were pretty, yeah, jeez. So you don't think Circleville's that interesting, Sting? Okay. Clearly a number of writers who to some degree knew each other. Yeah. Small town can simultaneously be the safest and most dangerous place to live. That's kind of true. That's kind of true, Anthony. Yes, very true. And Anthony, thank you for becoming a patron. I appreciate it, man. So yeah, interesting, twisty, turny story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully it doesn't keep any of you up tonight. The sheriff and the superintendent's wife were in on it. It's a good possibility. I've actually thought about doing one on the Phantom Killer, Anthony. There was a guy who did it's an unfinished documentary that's actually really good about the Phantom Killer. And I actually looked him up the other day, and he passed away because I was wanting to like kind of use some of his documentary and have him be on to discuss it. But I looked him up, and he passed away last year. So that sucks. There's also a writer. He wrote a book about the Phantom Killer. His name's Jason Presley. I tried finding his contact information online, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But he's kind of like the foremost authority on the Phantom Killer. So I think it would be a fun show to do, like a fact or fiction, the Phantom Killer. I think that'd be a fun one. I lived in a small town for a little while. I was scared all the time. Once my place was broken into and the person did your laundry. What? Somebody broke into your house and did your laundry? That's insane. They had to be stoned, right? I mean, jeez. There's also kind of a similar case. I can't remember what state it's in, known as the Watcher. Wow, that's crazy, Nico. Jeez, was it a man or a woman, or do you not know? That's the weirdest. I mean, breaking and entering story I've ever heard. Break into your house and do your laundry. That's insane. Here in DC back in the 60s, there was the Freeway Phantom. It was on the ID channel. Ah, cool. When I get stoned, I can't be bothered to do my own laundry, let alone anyone else's. No idea. You have no idea if it was a man or a woman. Jeez. Not Jason Priestley. His name's Jason Presley. So yeah, Nico, do you think this story keep you up tonight? This one shouldn't keep you up, right? Not quite as demented as the Cindy James story. Terra Calico, that's a good one. Yep, that's a good one. Sting of the Scorpion. Yep, that is a good one. I need a Robert Stack voice GPS navigator. See, that would scare me. He'd be like, turn left here, and I'd be like, no. No freaking way. But again, I highly recommend you guys check out Lord Nart's YouTube channel. Great channel. And thank him again for letting me use his really well done video as a reference for this case. Was the Watcher based upon the Keanu Reeves movie? No, it was not. It was certainly not. This might keep me up because my brain will be working overtime trying to figure things out. Oh, man. The Golden State Killer. Yes. My goodness. What an interesting story that is. You're watching Lucio Fulci's City of the Living Dead tonight. Nice, Johnny. Very nice. Well, people, I'm going to call it a night right there. Thank you all for tuning in and hanging out with me as we discussed the Circleville letters. Yeah, fun little mystery there. Very strange mystery. There's a lot going on there. Jeez, a lot going on there. But hopefully we'll do some more of these in the near future. I've got a couple of ideas, and hopefully I'll get permission to use similar videos to John's as reference for those. So, do I think Mr. Wacker wrote some of the letters? Possibly, yeah. You know what? Envy Davler, I think you're onto something there, my friend. I think you're onto something. But let me give some shout outs here. Let's see. Big Crack Rock, thank you for the gifted sub. That was very kind of you, sir. You're the man. And I got a new subscriber over on Twitch. Let me find him. Junker, thank you for subscribing over on Twitch. I appreciate that. Shout outs to Envy Davler, Sting of the Scorpion, T-Bob, Sam XWI. Thank you guys for tuning in over on Twitch. Time to do your laundry, Nico. Another great stream, Piz. Thanks. Well, thank you, Nico, and thank you for the $5 super chat. I appreciate that, sir. Very kind of you. Aaron Lewis, could you get permission to watch The Mutilator? Very good question. I thought about that, Aaron. I would have to cut out the nudity in the film. And there's a good possibility, I mean, with some of the violence in that movie, I may have to cut out some of the violence to do that also. Because both YouTube and Twitch are getting, I don't know. Especially the kill involving the big hook through the lady's crotch. I could see that that not going over very well on either YouTube or Twitch, unfortunately. But that did cross my mind, Aaron. Take care, David. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to David. Thank you, Captain Halloween. Thank you, Nico, Johnny, Aaron Lewis, Anthony Jordan, Fires, Brian Trash, Robert Long, E Boogie, Dub Videos, Jeff Sheeran. Let's see who else was with me tonight over on YouTube. Bryn, thank you for tuning in, Bryn. Kowloon Reloaded, thank you for tuning in. Captain Tim, thank you. Toronto Freddy, thank you. And Susan, thank you. Jonathan Fro McHugh, thank you for tuning in. And yeah, good live stream, Piz. Have a good night. Thank you, Faces of Horror. I appreciate that. All right. Well, you guys have a great night. Thank you for tuning in. And yeah, we'll do it again in the very, very near future. So have a great night. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you again real soon. Peace.